miigwech. Hanagana.
Bojo, Heidi Burns Indigenous, Mississauga and Donjiba, Michisaagi Territory Inda. Welcome to the second part of this year's Pine Tree Talks webinar series, The Ecology of Monoman. My name is Heidi Burns. I'm your moderator for today's webinar, which I would like to acknowledge opened with that beautiful singing and drumming of the Monoman song by Dorothy Taylor. Today, we're joined by three leading Monoman experts from Michisaagi Territory, where we will learn all about the biology and genetics of Monoman and the Monoman ecosystem. Michisaagi Territory is covered by Treaty 20 and Williams Treaties. Today's event is following Treaties Recognition Week in Ontario, a time designated in 2016 to encourage us all to take a moment to learn about our treaty territories in which we reside, work, and visit, and those territories we call home, in order to develop positive treaty relationships. On behalf of Trent University, Chani Wenjack School for Indigenous Studies, and Pine Tree Talks organizers, we offer our gratitude to the Michisaagi Anishinaabe as the first caretakers of this territory for their teachings of the earth, water, and all our relations. May we honor each other, our environment, our treaty relationships, and the teachings we receive together today. Miigwech to all of you for coming together today from across Northern Turtle Island, and to our panelists for sharing their knowledge with us from Michisaagi Territory today. I'm so very fortunate to be introducing our three speakers who have dedicated much of their lives' work to ecological restoration and who have greatly influenced my own work and relationship to Monoman. Elder, traditional harvester, author, and director of Indigenous Studies PhD program, Gidigaa Migizi. Michisaagi elder, traditional harvester, and educator in traditional practices, Jeff Beaver. And program coordinator, instructor for the Trent University and Fleming College Ecological Restoration Program, where he researches and monitors aquatic plants in the Kawartha Lakes, Dr. Eric Sager. Miigwech to each of you for being with us today to offer your knowledges and experiences with Monoman. We'll now begin our panel discussion, and I will ask the panelists a series of questions. So Doug, I'll direct this first question to you. Not everyone knows what the Monoman plant looks like. Can you describe what Monoman is and what are the growing stages of Monoman?
Well, Monoman is, we live with this plant for a long time. This is a plant that grows in water, shallow water, down to the depth of maybe 4 feet. There is a type of rice that grows even deeper, but it's generally grows around between 2 and 4 feet within bays, quiet bays, and so on. It's a plant that comes up. It's a grass, and it produces a seed, which we eventually can store and will sustain us over the wintertime. And therefore very important in this part of the world, actually. This is about the only place in the world alone around the Great Lakes region it grows. So we are very close to this plant. We cherish this plant. And it's very much part of our ecosystems within this part of Ontario.
Eric or Jeff, do you guys want to jump in with anything more about the Monoman plant and what the growing stages of Monoman are?
I can probably chime in there a little bit. So rice it's an annual plant. It grows from a single seed every year, starting to germinate probably as soon as the sun gets strong enough, and maybe late April, early May, it'll start germinating on the bottom of the lake, and continues to reach towards the surface. And by about maybe the middle of June, you'll see it at the floating leaf stage, where there's usually 2 or 3 leaves that come up and they'll float on the surface. for probably 2 or 3 weeks until the roots get big enough so it's strong enough to put up a spike. And this is the floating leaf stage. The next stage is the aerial stage. It continues to grow for the next couple of months until about maybe mid-July. You're going to see the male part of the plant start to emerge, and then you'll see the female part start to come just at the very end. That's where the seeds are. It continues to flourish and ripen, and other sort of side plants will come up and continue to ripen. And by about usually by about the first week in September, in some areas, it's ready to start going in with the canoes and start harvesting the rice. And usually by the end of September, it's mostly done, and the seeds will fall back. The ones that are left will fall back into the water, and they'll lay dormant there and waiting for the next the right conditions to come along in the spring to start the process all over again.
Thank you. Thank you both for your beautiful descriptions of the growing stages. This next question I am going to direct to you again, Jeff. You've done a lot of restoration work and reseeding of Monoman. Can you talk about the role of Monoman in the ecosystem and the significance of Monoman to the food systems in this territory?
Yeah, it's one of the most important plants that you have in the whole Kawartha Lakes and the whole Great Lake system is for creating the best habitat for lots of different kinds of fish. You're going to see little crayfish in there. You're going to see the water snakes in there. You're going to see all sorts of bird life in there. Ducks and geese, the herons. They're all in the rice, and they're there to feed on those animals and plants that are there. And so it's really important that the first probably the first 10 feet, where the water goes down to 10 feet from there into the shoreline. That's probably the most important part of the whole lake as far as life goes. That's where the little fish are, and that's where the bigger species are going to come in to feed on the smaller species. And the rice it holds the whole system together. The muskrat is there, the beaver, mink, otter, they're all in there living within the rice. And and you notice a big difference as soon as the rice disappears. The animals and the fish and all those little things, they disappear too. So it's a big benefit to have the rice growing in our lakes. We're very, very lucky to have it. There used to be a lot more, but we still have a fair bit, and we're working to restore that and keep the rice growing, and trying to bring more people on side with with what we're doing and in the restoration efforts for everything. The health of the lake is important.
For sure. I think all of us discussing today have had the experience of learning about that and watching it happen season by season, where some rice beds are nice and thick, and some seasons they're a little thinner, and watching those changes year after year, definitely. Would anyone else like to add anything to that question?
I think one of the fascinating things about the way it grows compared to, say, some of the other emergent plants, like, you see the big stands of cattails, or even the Phragmites stands, which are slowly popping up, is you don't get those distinct monocultures. It's not the only thing growing. So if you go into those really thick rice beds, Doug the other day was describing, canoeing across Chemung Lake, feeling kind of fearful of not being able to see over the tops of the beds. But within even those thick stands, there'd be lots of diversity of other plants that are able to grow. So there's lots of these relationships that Jeff talked about between the plants and the animals, but there's also lots of relationships that evolve between the different plants themselves. So lots of diversity is associated. We really do see the resurgence of rice as a good news story with respect to the providing some resiliency to the ecosystem, to everything that's going on around the ecosystem right now. So
let me add to a little bit here in terms of the story of the Migizi Anishinaabe. And we tend to look at things through what I call through a different eye. Like it's nothing wrong with it. It's probably a good natural way of looking at things, which I call Anishinaabe science. But what we do here, when we talk about, say, the different stages and growth of rice, is we tell stories around it, right? We tell stories of the time that it comes up in the spring and so on, and it brings us warmth in that kind, rather than, I guess, scientifically, what they would say would be, the Western scientists would be, the sun is going to shine on the water and it's going to warm it up, and the seed that has fallen from the previous year's growth, which is an annual plant, so it has to regenerate every year. Sometimes it's in abeyance, so it'll, that's an aside thing that it'll do. It'll go for years before it'll get the right conditions to make it grow again. So it has the ability to stay a long time in the mud of the bottom of the bay. But we tell stories more of the rice is the one that helps with the warming of that water, which is the spiritual side of that rice. It has the ability to work with spirit in order for this to happen, right? That's the way, in Anishinaabe science, that's the way they would explain that happening. Because science sometimes fails to understand the spirit of things, right? And that's probably okay to the Western mind, but to Anishinaabe, we very much give credence to that little bit of Minutu Adzuin, right? That is the spirit of that plant. That's why we go out of our way to call it spirit rice, spirit grass. That's the sort of translation of it. So it has different stages. Bimachtain, that's the beginning of the work of the spirit. That's when that seed starts to respond, right, to all the things around it, including the warm water, which is warmed by the spirit of summer coming. Spirit of spring is coming, right? These are all spirits to Anishinaabe, and this rice has a relationship in there. It's one of the main spirits, actually, at that time of year. It's food for us. It's so important that we give credence to it all the time. You have to. I go out there and give tobacco to the rice seed in the spring. I do it again in the floating stage, which is around the end of June, which is the stage of also summer solstice. Remember, which again another spirit is working here. So much of this surrounds that. It's Minoya Imadzivin. It's all of life working together, right? That's where that fits. So it's an important food. It's been with us thousands of years. I think Jeff mentioned somewhere one time when I heard him talk, there's some evidence, archaeological evidence, it was around 3,500 years ago. Well, we even began in our stories giving it credence in one of our migration stories. That is, a migration we think occurred just after the Ice Age. That's a long time ago. Geologically, that's 8,500 years ago, and somewhere from then to now, this happened. And it was food that was given to us to kind of sustain us through a harsh Ontario winter. And this is very important. If you didn't have that, Anishinaabe may not be here to tell you about it, but we're here.
Gidigaa. So beautiful answers.
It's a good one.
That sort of segues us into a question I have for you, Eric. You've been researching and observing aquatic plants in the Kawartha Lakes, Migizi region for nearly 3 decades. Could you tell us about the biology and genetic strands of Manoomin in this region?
We don't know. From a Western science perspective, I'm sure Jeff and Doug would certainly have a lot to say about the different, what I would probably call an ecotype, or the different types of rice that we see throughout, the Kawartha Lakes region and Great Lakes watershed for that matter. We sort of see within the Kawartha Lakes, Pigeon Lake, Chemung, the little bald populations, what we would, I think, classify it as the sort of the typical Kawartha strain. But then when you go into some of the other areas, the rice does look different, whether that's a distinct genetic population or whether that's a response of the plant to where it's growing. I mean, that's something that is yet to be determined. I think that the resurgence of rice on Rice Lake that we've seen within the last 5 years, and I'll defer to Jeff on this for sure. But when we see the seed from those populations, it's about twice the seed size is what we see up on Pigeon Lake. So that would suggest it's something different from a genetic ecotype, perhaps. But I'll let Jeff talk about that specifically, as he has the most experience with that population.
Yeah, every summer we go from kind of like up northwest of Lindsay, monitoring rice beds right down into the Lanark area. So from about 10 to 15 years of doing that work, I think there's probably about 5 different plants. I don't know if they're genetically different or not, but they look different. The Mitchell Lake rice is lighter and smaller with a taller plant than the rice that we have at Pigeon Lake. It just looks different. The Pigeon Lake rice, the little bald rice, is better quality. The Mitchell Lake rice, it's for me, it's something that works good with habitat. If you just want to grow some rice to create some habitat, it's good for that. Not great as a table rice, because you have to work a lot to get anything out of it for to eat. The little bald and the Pigeon Lake rice is better. The Ardoch rice, which came from Rice Lake originally, it's pretty good too. And there's another one that I've found, the Crow Lake rice. There's almost no rice in it. It's super light, even lighter than the Mitchell Lake rice. There's plant there, and there's a few kernels, but it's so light that it's not even worth harvesting. And there's one other one that I can think of right offhand. It's down on Moira Lake, and this one is it's a shorter plant, and it ripens up. I would say, we've been there on around the 18th of August, and the rice is coming off that early. So it's all different, but to take it to a lab and see whether it's genetically different would be something that needs to be done. So, and then we have our own rice, a nice variety here that started growing here on Rice Lake. I think I've seen it about 6 years ago, and it's a big plant. And like Eric says, the grain is extra long. That's a beautiful plant. And from what we've seen is that the carp are in there trying to root it out, but this plant is so big and strong and got a big root ball on it that even though the carp are there, they don't seem to be able to root this one out. And it's slowly spreading eastward down the lake. So it's gone about a good mile already. We're finding plants that we didn't seed them there, but they're just there now. And so this plant is drifting around quite a bit. And heading down, we've got a real nice little patch where we are seeding down in around between Harris Island or Rainy Island, between there and Sugar Island. And that was where even when I was growing up, there was a little bit of rice there. So the depth is perfect. And we put a lot of seed in there this year. So we're hoping that that's going to really take off, because this is a beautiful plant that we got going here. And it's better than anything I've seen anywhere. So we're working with it. And just one further thing, the fellow that's helping me with this rice a lot, Bob Pierce, a former Trent student, and he was with John McAndrews when he did the test plots over in McGregor Bay that found the rice that was this pollen that was down about 3,500 years old. So I'm working back with him again, and he lives right here in Roseneath Landing. So I mean, we go out a lot looking at the rice. He's got a beautiful pontoon boat. We go out and, we check it out probably 5 times a year. So he's a very big time supporter of the rice work that we're doing. And he helps me out a lot. So it's kind of a neat thing to think that the one of the students at Trent is come right back around full circle, and he's back here on the lake and helping with the rice. One of the projects that he was working on when he was a student at Trent back in, I don't know, maybe the 70s, I guess. So pretty neat.
Monoman, I think, has that effect on us student researchers. Speaking of which, as a graduate student researcher, I've learned a great deal about the depletion of Monoman in this territory. Doug, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decline of the Monoman beds in Migizi territory, and of course, we'll open the question up to Jeff and Eric as well afterwards.
Heidi, can you repeat that? You're breaking up on me here.
Sure, I can. As a graduate researcher, I've learned a great deal about the depletion of Monoman in Migizi territory. I was wondering, Doug, if you could talk a little bit about the decline of the Monoman beds in this territory.
Yeah. There's a lot of history, of watching wild rice with our people, and I spent a lot of time with the older ones who remember some of the earlier stages that I remember. Some of the stages of the rice that was occurring in the 1800s was some of the stories that I was told. Now, Chimon Lake, as an example, it got flooded out by dams at Buckhorn and raised the water twice. One of them was around 1844 in order to enhance lumbering and the Trent Canal systems and so on. Now, the second raising was around 1908. They rose, both times they rose 3 feet. So in total, there was a 6 feet rise. The rice took a big hit at that time. It went and it hid. It got drowned out, if you want to say it that. I mean, it had the capacity to come back, like I said before. This is why we know that, because of that big experience. This is a very traumatic time for that plant. Mm-hmm. It went and disappeared according to the older ones, but it reappeared again. And it reappeared in those waters that were drowned out. As soon as the trees started to disappear and become stumps in the lake, the rice took over and it boomed. There was a big bloom of rice at that time. These are the times that they remember where you couldn't paddle through Chimon Lake. The first, between 1844 and 1908, you could not paddle on Chimon Lake because of the wild rice growing there. Only a little path was there. This is what they would tell me. They would describe. They would even describe the birds that were there. When Jeff talks about the dependence of animals on that plant, there was thousands of birds. There was thousands of ducks. And our people talk about the days when the whooping crane landed on Chimon Lake. So it's I asked the archaeologists, I said, could you not find skeletal remains of cranes? And one of them researched it out and came back to me and said, no, we can't find one around Chimon Lake. I said, well, we talk about it. They said, well, maybe it didn't die here. But anyway, they said the nearest crane skeleton is just north of Toronto in a marsh there. That's where they found one of them. But I remember even in Champlain's log, which is he passed through Chemung Lake around 1615, he described the whooping cranes there. If you read his log, I asked Joel to translate some of the works of Champlain for me, just to pick up these little nuances that he described in a documented way, right? But our people talk about it. This is what I mean, that we tell stories around it. And the crane itself is a very important bird. It's one of our main clans in the area. So it's when you look at Anishinaabe clan culture, it'll tell you pretty well what was around, what they related to in terms of the animal world, and how close they were to it. And one of them was the whooping crane, which they consider to be a leadership clan. You can hear a whooping crane apparently called at the south end of Chemung Lake and be heard at the village at the north end of the lake in the old days, right? They talk about that sound that they would make. But the diversity, the thickness went away. It's gone again. And started going into, the rice started to disappear almost with the same time that the cottagers come into the lake, which is around the early 50s. And a lot of people moved into that what I call a very important part of the ecosystem, which is 50 feet of the shoreline and 50 feet out. That's where you have all the ecosystems of which Migizi and Anishinaabe lived on. I've said this before, and but we of course just didn't stay there, but that's where most of our activity was, and that was a very diverse part of our territory in there. In fact, when we were signing treaties in the early 1800s, we were telling government, we want the shorelines, we want the rice beds, we want the oak trees, we want the maple trees, we want the river mouths where the salmon are, we want to keep the islands. Do you think they listen? And it's the same story today, isn't it? I mean, surely, why are people building on shoreline? Can they not save some of it? I feel that about Pigeon Lake as an example. Man, that's a beautiful ecosystem. I grew up there on a daily basis. I felt every season. There's the amount of muskrats on that creek, the amount of ducks, the snakes, the frogs, all that was so beautiful to see. Even the plants, like Eric mentioned about the marshes, even the little plant like the duckweed, the mesons that grow there within this space of 50 feet to 50 feet, I call it. The sweet flag, the calamus root, very important in Anishinaabe. All that is dependent upon each other. Rice protects that, protects the coolness of the water. It was very much also grew on rivers and bays and inlets of rivers, and they cooled the water for the fish, right? We don't have that anymore. There's a lot of clear cutting happened in Ontario, believe it or not. People just don't remember these things. We remember. We still tell stories. I was told stories about it. I tell stories about it as much as I can, and just to kind of go try and see whether we can ever go back to that kind of time. I wish.
Me too. Miigwech. Gidigaa. Jeff or Eric, could I invite you to add anything more? to Doug's answer?
Well, I could just add that on Rice Lake here, it was a big attractant for people from all the whole area here. I know there was people from Curve Lake came down, and my relatives from Ardoch, they come all the way up here through the various rivers and lake systems, and they camped out here, harvested rice, and then months later they'd all head back home again. So, you know, it was really important for people to gather up enough rice to get them through for the next year, you know. And like Doug said, the muskrat were very populations were just crazy around anywhere where there's big rice beds. The muskrats move in. They build their houses out of the plants, and you know, there must have been thousands of them on this lake here. And when the depth was right, I was telling about there was one trading post at Hiawatha, and they recorded an annual harvest of 7,000 to 10,000 muskrats alone. Not to mention all the other, you know, the marten and the fisher, you know, a lot of animals that were here when the habitat was right. But, you know, as soon as the rice disappeared, well, that was the keystone species for everything. And when that fell through, you know, all them other species, they weren't long disappearing too. So, you know, that's just an example of, you know, when you start tinkering with nature and monkeying around with water levels and changing the whole landscape, you know, it's just devastating for the fish and wildlife in the area. So, you know, it's difficult to see, like Doug said, Pigeon Lake and all the Kawarthas, everywhere I go, I see new cottages going up every year, and they're not cottages anymore, they're mansions. And the first thing they do when they buy a piece of land is fire up the bulldozers and smash it all to pieces and harden up the shoreline and fill in the marshes. And, you know, it's not good. It's going to backfire someday, and these lakes are going to die, I think. So, yeah, I wish people just leave things alone.
I think there's a misunderstanding of a certain segment of our sort of population in terms of what these Kawartha lakes are supposed to look like. You know, there's this desire to impose this narrative of crystal clear, deep water, hardened shoreline on a system which is really a highly productive wetland. And I think I get a lot of phone calls regularly about, you know, why is there so much rice in these lakes? And my simple answer is it's because it can grow there, and the rice will only grow where it can grow. And I think it was in the 90s. It was shortly after I sort of came onto the scene in the Kawarthas, moved up to the Oliver Ecological Center, Trent's property on the north end of Pigeon Lake. And I met with Doug, and I had a bunch of maps because we were starting to see beds of rice returning. And I wanted to know if these were areas which were traditional areas where harvesting happened or where there were beds. And he drew a couple circles on a map, and we went out and looked, and a lot of those, and this was before some of the active reseeding was going on. I think Jeff had started some of his reseeding work on, might have been over near Gannon's Narrows or in that area. But I don't think it was happening out in the lakes per se yet, maybe. But I think there was certainly a shift in the ecosystem. Probably got a little help from zebra mussels to clear the water. Eurasian milfoil kind of disappeared, but because of all that development in the watershed, I think the lakes probably got a little shallower, and so that created conditions where the rice could start to grow again, and it really started to grow. I don't think it's anything like it once was, but I have to say that it was one of those things where you get a hope, you know, you feel good about something in the ecosystem again, and it's amazing. It's amazing the power that a plant can give, not only to the ecosystem but to the people as well. And I think that narrative of rice being a good news story is a narrative that I find find difficult to believe that not everybody can just accept it. That there is actually, it gets equated to be, much like many of our other quote unquote invasive species. And I think part of that, maybe that's a misunderstanding. Part of that's, being caught up in the sort of that cottage narrative that we want to create for the Kawarthas. But I think there's an opportunity to listen to what the plant's saying. The plant's not growing where it used to grow because it can't grow there. And the areas where it's growing now, you'll often hear stories, well, this used to be a farmer's field. Well, it's not a farmer's field now, but it's providing some pretty good habitat for rice to grow, and then for all these other components of the ecosystem to start to come back. And I think we have to embrace that and encourage it. Doug put out the charge the other day that we really need to think about rewilding things again, and I agree with that. That's going to give our ecosystems the resiliency they need to deal with the myriad of other things we're throwing at it right now. And I think we have to listen to this plant.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Miigwech, for your answers. Jeff, as a traditional harvester and educator, can you share a little about harvesting of Monoman and the recultivation of Monoman? You did touch a little bit earlier on about the recultivation, but maybe we could expand a little bit about what harvesting and recultivation of Monoman looks like.
Yeah, sure. So like I said before, we go out and we try to look at all the beds and try and figure out, which is the best bed to start sending people to. Like there's probably about 10 or 15 that we check every year. And out of the 10 or 15, there might only be 3 or 4 that are kind of worth going to. So as the ricing season comes along, people start phoning, or I put in the newsletter that, these 3 lakes are probably the best places to go. And people just, load up the canoes when they think it's ready, right in around Labor Day weekend, and that's where they go. And this year was a pretty tough year, where there was only a couple of places really that were much good. There wasn't a lot of rice that I found anywhere that was, not like Pigeon Lake usually is pretty good, but it wasn't that good this year. So we didn't go there, but we went to Ardoch. It was I would say medium there, and some people went there. Rice Lake was pretty good this year, and we did go over to Mitchell Lake with Doug's class, and we got some rice there. So basically, the harvest, you have a paddler in the front of the boat, and they're searching around, looking through the rice beds to find the thickest and the ripest batch of plants, and they'll carefully paddle you through there so they don't knock the rice off before the person in the back with 2 light cedar sticks, about maybe 33 inches long. They'll fold those plants over the edge of the boat and just give it a light tap with the other stick, and anything that's ripe on there will fall off into the bottom of the canoe. And then in 2 or 3 days, you can go back through the same area again. The plant ripens from the top down. Mm-hmm. So in maybe 3 days, it'll ripen up again. You can kind of go back through your same channel again, and you can harvest it again if you have a chance to go back a second time. So that's basically what we probably do that. I would say if you get 10 days, 2 weeks of harvesting, that's probably about the limit. Usually a thunderstorm or a big wind will come in, and the plants will start moving around, and it doesn't take much to dislodge that ripe rice. The seeds are nice and big and heavy, and any little movement, that seed will fall off back into the water again. So that's kind of that's what we do. And from there, I just usually put it back into the water again, and we put it in bags. I put it back into the water again for maybe 4 or 5 days. It helps ripen the plant up, and there's a little rice worm in there. If you don't do that, they'll just continue to eat the rice right in the bag. So I usually sink it underneath the water for about 4 or 5 days, and then bring it out, and all the little critters in there are done for, and just spread it on tarps, and in 3-4 nice warm days that you might get in around the end of September, early October, you can just bag it up again and wait for another nice batch of weather, maybe in around Thanksgiving, and you can start doing the parching, which is putting it into a kettle and roasting it up under a little light fire. Kind of gives it a nice nutty flavor and browns up the outside of the kernel, loosens up that kernel. It really dries the rice right out. So, like Doug said, you can keep it forever if you keep it dry and in jars or whatever. It'll keep forever. So then we'll dance it with a pair of moccasins on, so you don't crush the rice. If you wear hard boots, you're going to crush it. And the next step is you're going to sift it off in the wind. So the light ground up chaff is going to come off of those hard kernels, and the wind will just blow it away. And your nice hard heavy kernels will fall back into another kettle or onto a tarp or a blanket. And then the final cleaning, you're just sitting down at a table with a couple of pie plates and pouring some out onto the pie plate and separating that's the most time consuming part of it, really, and the most tedious part of it is just separating those kernels that didn't dance off or winnow off for you, and you got to pick that out of there, and then it's ready to cook after that. So that's what we're just kind of doing some of that work now. It's sit around in the evening and clean up the rest of the rice and put it in jars, and we'll use it over the winter for whatever way we want, rice pudding or the soups and stews and all that. So yeah.
Nice. Well, there was a question that came in from the first part of the webinar series, and it seems pertinent to ask here. And that question I posed to each of you. Should Monoman be promoted as a sustainable local food? Maybe we could begin with you, Doug.
Okay, Miigwech. The short answer would be yes, right? I wish that somehow or another these indigenous plants would be nurtured, would be whatever we have to do, keep it around as long as we can. Because I think there's a relationship between that and the very existence and survival of man. I can see in my older age that we're in trouble in a lot of ways. The Western style of living is not sustainable. I think they know that, but they can't do anything about it to stop it. There's a lot of good people out there. We're going to have to depend on these good people to kind of promote this. And we have a lot of allies now. We're strong in that way. We're coming. People are working at it like I've never seen before. I remember in the days of, say, in the 1950s and 60s, when the rice was disappearing, it was backing off, and there was nobody around to help, right? So it was a very disappointing time. But from that time to now, it's so different, thanks to whomever started this. And I thanked some people in my last talk. And there's a reason for that, is because I really want to encourage people like yourselves to work at it, and I know each of you in your own way know what I'm talking about, and I think most people know what I'm talking about, but sometimes we just are so taken up by the modern way of doing things in the modern context that we forget that we're a basic soul, we're a basic spirit. We can't be fooling around much longer. I mean, it's the point. We're at a point of no return, and this is why I was saying the other day and Eric mentioned it about rewilding. It's a concept. It's an idea that animals need. We're thousands of animals are disappearing every day in terms of a species. Like birds are just pathetically low. and some of the other birds are doing amazingly well, which are the ones who are what we call the earth cleaners, like the crow and the seagull. They're doing amazing because we just dump all over the place good food. And they're just coming along and picking it up. They're doing good. But the birds, like the oriole, the flycatchers, the warblers, the ones who bring summer to us, what's going to happen if they disappear? Neiman is not no longer is going to come up here. We'll have another big freeze. And we'll have repeat history we should be learning from. So yes, rice is part of this whole process of survival. And I think it's important that we keep it.
Dr. Eric, would you like to contribute to this question? Should Monoman be promoted as a sustainable local food?
I'll defer to Jeff for now.
Yeah, I think for sure it's got to be promoted as sustainable food. I mean, I think it's basically proven itself over the last many thousands of years that it's something that certainly is a sustainable food. And I think with what we're going through now, it's just a little warning sign when you start seeing the store shelves being emptied out, and it happens so fast that you don't know what's coming in the future here. So it's important to certainly don't destroy it. You should be trying to promote it. You may need it in the near future, just the way things are going in this world. It just doesn't make any sense to me to go out and try and destroy something that could sustain you in the next little while. A lot of stuff is going fast, and this is just a little scare we're getting right now, I think, for what's coming in the future. So, not only the Indian will need the rice, but I think maybe a lot of other people might need it too. Like, we don't know what this future is going to hold. It's not getting any better, I can tell you that. It's the way things are going. So, yeah, I think, certainly it's a sustainable food. It's been around for forever, and it can be grown in lots of different places if you just give it a chance. And that's the big thing. People are not willing to give it a chance in some places. So that's my thought on it anyway. And Doug's covered a lot of it already. But we've got to work hard to keep this plant around, along with all the other ones too that have disappeared. That list, the species at risk list, it's not going down. It's getting bigger every year. So, we gotta protect the habitat that's out there, because there's not much left, especially here in southern Ontario. It's awful. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, I think that's the real value of rice, is it brings a lot of friends. And so, not only are we nurturing a sustainable food, but we're also nurturing a sustainable ecosystem. And we have a responsibility to do better. In a very short amount of time, we've had drastic impacts on ecosystems. We have to rethink our approach in terms of how we are going to interact with these natural ecosystems in the future. It's not something that's there just to serve us. We have a responsibility to work with and to nurture. And what better teacher than right now, the rice that's doing its job for us right now. So let's listen to what it's saying.
Absolutely. Miigwech, there's a lot for all of us to think about. And I really appreciate your conversation and teachings that you've shared with us today.
Miigwech to you too, Heidi.
Yes.
I could go up mint pump beef.
Miigwech.
Miigwech, Heidi.
Miigwech. It's been lovely talking with you. We've worked our way through all of the questions that we had for today. Can't say too miigwech enough. We're so fortunate to be able to offer viewers the premiere screening of a short video with Gidigaa, Migizi, and Jeff Beaver that was put together by Josh Felton, Professor of Environmental and Natural Resource Sciences at Fleming College. He spent some time with Gidigaa, Migizi, and Jeff Beaver over the summer talking about Manoomin, and he's prepared he's prepared this video of elder teachings, which we're so excited to share with you all now as we bring the webinar to a close. And we'll be following that short video with Dorothy Taylor's performance of the Monoman song. So please stick around for that. And be sure to tune in on December 1st at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for part 3 of this webinar series, where we'll hear from very special guests, Janice McHugh, Autumn Watson, and Damon Wheatung, who will teach us all about putting Monoman on your table. May we honor the Monoman, each other, our teachings, and our treaty relationships always. Miigwech you all.
I'll tell you the story in the language. Anin gdinem qui debach metonim meus anishnabe magi bishama chisagi gini kipi shagi ema biga scouting chim scouting o kipi tu na dashu kena nishnabe in minwama kena nishnabe adzuin ma mitash kanin dwa with the Bishnemanik Gawi Bishaik Ki Kito o Nana Bush Midashio Kanad no Nishnaben Miyaji Bishagi Wake Midash Ramkana with the Manomin with the Gidigaa Shinek where this Chigaming Miji can make with the Tato Nishnabe Meosha Mi Uge Ma Jiging Ma Neping Dash Mi Dash with the anti Kito Kina game in the talk. Panego Mi Wach in the Nanan Mi with the Chimik Wach Coconut make Agin Wangina Mi Wach Minoga. Ka ni ben ge o shawin kipito wat ne sagana dasche menayag ma misagaje chenen mong dashnogum miko dashkat kashnika nga nishna ba man Manoomin kishnika ta ne pipane o ga mi gwed o kichimanato kena yo ma kashamachi king yo Monoman. Oh, miigwech. During the time that we left our home, which is a Great Lakes area, because of glaciation, we returned to the mouth of the Great River, and we had to stay away because of the cold and the building of ice that was formed by Bitbone, which is the spirit of winter. Remember, our seasons are spirits, and they worked at these things. That's their role. Now, Nana Bojo and Bitbone had an argument and had a fight over who was the strongest. And Bitbone showed Nana Bush that she was the strongest by freezing all this land, Nishnabe's land. So Nana Bush lost that fight, so we had to leave here. And we were after Nana Bush for thousands of years to fix this problem. But we ended up actually along the coast below the mouth of the Great River. And then one day Nanabush says, well, I'm going to go and ask Neben, which is the spirit of summer, and Shawin, which is the spirit of the south, to come here and warm it up, see if they could do it and melt the ice. So they did. And so quickly, summer took over a certain part of the year. So then Anishinaabe was able to come back to this Great Lakes. Now the instruction given was that they would come and they would migrate up the Great River, and when they got to their home, they would find the grass growing on the water, which is going to feed them. It'll be food and become a staple. And this is the plant we call Monoman. And because of that connection, we also changed some of the name a little bit to Manoomin, which is the Monoman means good plant, while Manoomin wants to mean the spirit rice. So we have cherished this for a long time. And now we're talking about probably anywhere in terms of modern way of doing time or telling time would be 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Because the last glaciation to leave this area, we're told, was around 8,500 years ago. So the story goes that we will find this plant and this special plant growing here, and it fits the modern understanding of wild rice and where it came from.
And this is where they did a study. Trent University went back in here and they did some cores with a sampler down through the mud. Yes. And they found the rice was back in here about 3,500 years ago. They found pollen, like big layers of thick rice pollen way back in there. So this map here, it says, I'm not sure if that's the right date on it, but somebody wrote in 1935 on there. But I'm not sure if that is the right date or not. But anyway, everything that's shaded in here at when this map was made is wild rice. And we did an approximate area of what was here when this map was made, 2,500 acres anyway. This is what was here. And so you can see there's a big bed, stretches almost from Hiawatha and goes right down. At one time it all joined up right down past Foley Island. It was about 11 miles one way. So, by the time you gathered rice all through there, you would have an awful smash of rice. Huge beds, thousands of acres really, if this, once the water levels would have been back to where they were before the dam went in, there would have been rice all the way, right from here, all the way down, right into the Trent River. The whole thing was rice. But as the water levels come up, the rice beds shrunk back into sheltered areas, in behind the islands. And my aunt actually remembered harvesting rice right in here with an old fellow from Alderville in around probably 1932 or 33, in around there. And another old timer that is still alive, in his 90s, he remembers harvesting rice all around Sugar Island, out in here like this. And he said they'd fill the canoe in the morning, and they'd fill it again in the afternoon, him and his father.
The importance of wild rice is that, remember, the lifestyle of Anishinaabe is such that, we have to face the winter. Canadian winter is a pretty harsh environment for people who live on the land. So you needed something to sustain you from the fall to the spring during that period of winter, and you had to store some food. And the only one at that time that could be stored is the wild rice. That's the plant of the first stored food for us, right? Stored food was important, and so there's a couple of things that Anishinaabe did. One of them was to keep wild rice. It keeps good. If you dry wild rice in the proper way, it'll keep forever, right? Once it's in that black state, dried, cured, it'll stay forever. So you can have it all winter, and it will sustain you. It's a food that you can almost live by itself for a couple of months, and that's really what you need. The whole thing is a relationship of all that phenomena of survival of the winter, right? That's where wild rice, I think, became really important to the nation. And that's why I think it's important that the spirit world, and realizing that, had to create a certain plan for survival of that winter. It could be translated to mean that it has the ability to sustain the body over the winter of all the plants in the best way.
Yeah. There's people from Hiawatha harvesting Alderville, and others from Ardoch, and we have other people have come through, so they came all the way from Rama First Nation, all the way to Rice Lake. Thousands and thousands of acres, and I suppose they had they met their friends and relatives, and everybody would kind of, gather here probably about mid-August till maybe the end of September. Everybody come here. It was a gathering place for a lot of different people from hundreds of miles away. They would come here.
To Anishinaabe, everything is connected, right? I mean, you hear that all the time, but it's so true in terms of the stories that we tell, that all animals that live around the water and along the lake shore and the water's edge and so on, you can see where they survive on that plant. And other things like that appear to not survive on that plant, like turtles and frogs and snakes, that kind of animal. I think we overlook the fact that they use this as shelter. That's the way we look at things. There's a relationship there. Wild rice, you can see by spending a lot of time in it, all those big beds that used to be, that there's a lot of animals that depend on it, from the smallest little spider to the biggest goose and biggest muskie love wild rice to live in it. Bass, of course, live right in it. During the month when it's hot weather of August, the fish live under those beds of wild rice that float up. And wild rice has this knack of leaving the bottom and floating up en masse and laying there. We think actually that something has happened to the wild rice. That's what the old ones used to say, that would make it do that it would leave the bottom and float. The fish loved it. They lived under there. So, I mean, it just shows how we follow the animals and how they adapt to the plants, like the wild rice on the water. The muskrat, as an example, feeds on it quite heavily. They build their houses with wild rice, and they actually, I think, promote a lot of regeneration of the rice by eating the stalk, cutting it off when the seeds are mature, and it falls in, and those seeds get away from the geese. If the muskrat doesn't beat the geese will beat the muskrat, right? I call that the competition between the goose and the muskrat. And that balance has been something between them that have worked over many years, probably ever since the creation of of the wild rice. We understand and we recognize the importance of plants, and very much the wild rice, for the survival of the kind of animals that live here. Of course, we in turn as human beings live off these animals.
Charles' father here was a naturalist from Port Hope, and he would go out to, he had a cottage out around the mouth of the Autonomy there somewhere, and it talks about he bought 2 white muskrats, and he bought a couple black ones, and it says there they're about 10,000 annually upon the Rice Lake. And this one talks about all the fish that were in Rice Lake. They had a big feast over there. Black bass. This is an interesting one. American eel. Innumerable and delicious.
That's how you live on the land, is to get a relationship going and develop this relationship in order to survive with each other, right? The animal world, we believe, can survive here on Earth on its own without us. We have to give homage to them, we have to pray to them, and we have to give tobacco, and we have to know the importance of them within that system. That's what I ask of the children, and that's what we should live by. And it started to drag him all over this lake, believe it or not. Imagine picturing McComas going by here in his dugout canoe being pulled by a muskie all the way up the lake.
I like the looks of this bed back here. It's going to be perfect for the students to come up here and do some racing.
Nice.
Aha, miigwech. Ano ka na?